Dude, I should have taken this.
Kind of making our own infusion. The idea behind this is to take kind of taste and flavor profiles of different whiskeys that you like and kind of seeing how you could create the same flavor and profile of an aged whiskey without actually having to spend the money on, you know, a large aged whiskey that you could do. And it's done by taking like the similar profile. So what we're going to do is taste through 4 or 5 different whiskeys here and kind of see what your flavor profile is. And from there, build out your own bottle. And to start, I want to taste a very young whiskey here. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. This is Evan Williams, and this is their bottled in bond. Whiskey means that it is stored in a bonded warehouse inside of Kentucky. So bonded meant it is a federally safe warehouse, and they created these because there was a lot of problem with whiskey and fake whiskey in the early 1900s through Prohibition. Are 100 proof liquor, and it must be tax stamped or sealed, which you can see the green stamp on these, the vertical tax strip. And it is considered a higher proof, higher quality bourbon or whiskey, whatever you're doing. And when we're doing this, this is just a very young one, only 3 years old. But when you give it a taste, stick your whole nose in there like wine, you'll burn your senses out. So kind of under your mouth here and just kind of open your mouth and smell as you go. And you're going to get a little bit of like that beginning sweetness to it, right? Like that little bit of caramel, little bit of that little, your nostril hairs are like starting to burn a little bit. And it's going to wake you up. Scotch is...
Just for my term, is bourbon considered a type of whiskey or?
Yes. So if you look at the big overarching thing, whiskey's up top.
Okay.
And whiskey just means a distilled grain aged in oak for a minimum of 2 years. So bourbon has to come from the United States, made with corn. Scotch has to come from Scotland, malted cereal grains, specifically barley, and it must be aged for 3 years. And so on. From you go to Scotland, you go to Ireland, you go to Japan, they all have the same things. Now, bourbon is probably right now the most popular of the whiskeys. It overtook Scotch about 5 or 6 years ago in terms of popularity. And I think a lot of it has to do with, one, they're experimenting more than Scotch or someone else would be. So this is Evan Williams. It's
experimenting in terms of flavors and that kind of crap.
All that kind of stuff, and more the finishing. So this is a straight up bourbon, aged for 3 years in oak. They take it out at 145 proof. They dilute it down with Kentucky branch water to the bonded proof here, and then they bottle it. What you're seeing a lot more now with bourbons, especially American style bourbons, is finishing series, where they're finishing them in port barrels, in casks. They're double oaking. Woodford Reserve was the first to do it. Double oak, meaning you oak barrel it for 3 years, you take it out, put it in a fresh barrel for 6 months to get that really concentrated oak flavor. And they're doing things like single barrels, which Blanton's was probably the most popular and first one to do it, where you take just a single barrel and bottle that. Scotch has never done that. Irish whiskey's never done that. They've all been either blended or single malts, but never taking one barrel and seeing what it tastes like. And even more so when we talk about bourbon and stuff like that, there's something called MGP. MGP is the Midwest Grain Project. They're out of Indiana. And they have, I think last I heard it was 20,000 warehouses, each with about 10 to 15,000 barrels. And they just sell to anyone who wants it, distilled, aged whiskey for you to finish. So there's a company in town that just started up, River Roots. Michael Simon's backing it. All they're doing is they're buying these barrels from MGP and finishing it themselves and calling it their own bourbon. So there's a lot more accessibility to it anywhere you go.
That finishing could
be putting it in a barrel.
Mhm.
It could be what are they gonna finish?
Some of it is infusions, like we're going to play around with today.
Yeah.
Some of it is blending. So they'll take a 6, a 5, and a 4-year, blend it together, where most major distilleries wouldn't do that. If I have a 6-year bourbon, I want to sell a 6-year bourbon. But these new companies are saying, why not do it like we do champagne and blend it to get a really great flavor, like a great non-vintage champagne. Yeah, the vintage is still great, but you could blend and get these different flavors and nuances out of it. And that's where the experimentation's coming in. And we'll see that as we kind of progress through this a little bit, and especially when we start thinking about what we're going to infuse with. The other reason we start with this is it is the highest proof. A lot of times people say you want to start with the lowest proof, but if you're building up, and we're going to go through 4 pretty solid whiskeys here, you want to start with the higher and kind of mellow out as you go. If you waited till the end to hit the high proof, you'd feel it right away, and you'd be ready to go to sleep. This way, you get that kind of power of it first, and it balances out as we go. The second one, which is going to be a little more nuanced, is something we probably have never smelled or tasted before, Rosalie. Rosalie is a bark of a tree found in Spain, and it is similar to, if you've heard of Angostura, like the bitters before.
Yep.
It has that same kind of note of that dark walnutty flavor. And what it does is it's a prominent flavor in a lot of younger bourbons, and if you like that kind of nuttiness, that's something that could, pack a little more punch and come out a little more as it goes. When we taste, for example, the Buffalo Trace, this is going to be another wheated bourbon, so it's going to have a little more of that kind of mellow, almost orange note to it. So if that's something you like, when you take it, you could infuse a little of that dried orange peel in your bourbon and have that come out a little more and be a little more prevalent in it. The idea behind these infusions isn't to change the flavor. The idea is to kind of enhance the flavors you like in a whiskey. So when we get to maybe some of these, so this is like a 25-year-old Scotch or a 10-year-old bourbon, and you taste some of these, you're going to, more nuanced flavors are going to come out, and then you could take something like this and add, a little bit of that sage or a little bit of the malted barley to it, and you're going to get a flavor profile close to this. This bottle here is $20. These bottles here are anywhere from $80 to this one was like $280. So, taking some of those different flavors and enhancing it, then trying different things, and they also make great gifts for people because you could say you created your own bourbon blend. It refers to the bourbon and whiskey that's lodged in the oak itself.
I see. Interesting.
And then angel share
Evaporates up to heaven. Yep. So
Are they the only ones that do the devil's cut? I mean, at least they market it.
that's the only one I've seen do that. A lot of Scotch will do that. So they'll do it. It's their take on a double oak, where they'll age in a cask and then they'll age in a sherry cask. Like Macallan is famous for it. And that's the same idea where you're aging in a sherry cask, so you get some of that sherry notes out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So those finishes, the cask finishes, are almost the same thing. Jim Beam's the one who's just doing it with bourbon twice.
Distillery, keep it, in a sense, for a long time.
It is, but it's also, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's corn and water. So they're still making money. You could still sell. You may have paid tax on this for 25 years. You're only selling it for $200. They're making their money on it. They're not stupid about what they do. So they're making their money on this, but they're also making just so much on these lower end ones, which someone told me once, and they're very secret about it, but I think it's a liter bottle of a 2 to 3 year age has 25 cents worth of product in it.
Well,
Yeah, but it's got labor, overhead. I mean, it's still got.
It's got other things, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew he's an attorney, but
There must be some.
So the key thing about Buffalo Trace is their mash bill. So they use the same exact mash bill for every product they do. So whether you're having Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, Eagle Rare, E.H. Taylor, everything, these two are the exact same in terms of mash bill. The only difference is the blend of grains they use. So the only difference is where it's stored on the facility and how high in the warehouse it's stored, whether it's on the first floor up to the 7th floor. The reason being, where it's stored has a lot to do with the temperature variations, and the more temperature variations, the more age you get. So a higher floor tends to get more temperature variations. So something like Eagle Rare here, which is a 10-year, is going to be stored more towards the top because they want over those 10 years to get more temperature variations and fluctuations than something that they're everyday like Buffalo Trace, which is going to be stored more near the bottom. And they're okay with just a very minor temperature fluctuation because they're looking for just a standard baseline product. So what the temperature changes do is they contract and expand the barrel, which allows for bourbon to go into the barrel and then pull out the nutrients and the oak from the barrel. The more times you do that, the more flavor you pull out. And the variation can be anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees from top to bottom, because they're wooden houses essentially with air gaps and everything, so air flows through. And a lot of times, especially in the summer, those higher elevation ones get really, really, really hot because they just have the sun beating down on them. And there's two, kind of thoughts. Buffalo Trace does all their rick houses black to absorb heat. Evan Williams and Haven Hill do their rick houses white to push the heat away during the summer. I think the big difference, or there's very minor differences between it, but then you have the science behind it, and you have someone like Old Forester who is now aging in temperature controlled warehouses. So it's fully controlled year round, so they're still mimicking the full temperature range, but they have it on a very set schedule, so you don't get Cleveland weather where one day it's 65 and the next day it's 15.
Yeah.
They want to go hot, stay hot, then cold, and go up and down.
Eliminates global warming.
Yes.
Yeah.
The weather is now, they're only getting about 7 years of actual aging.
Oh, okay, wow, because it's changed.
The temperatures just changed so much compared to what it would have been even 20 years ago.
Yeah, wow, interesting. Okay.
So that's why a lot of these places are moving to more temperature-controlled warehouses and stuff like that, because they're having to age longer to get the same flavor profile that they would have just 10, 15 years ago.
It's partly what gives it the taste.
Yes.
And periodically they taste it to see is it ready or not.
Mm-hmm. Because something like Buffalo Trace, they're not aging it to a specific year.
Okay.
So they're looking for a flavor profile that they like. So their master distiller goes around, tastes it, and they'll pull, when he finds he likes it, they'll pull a whole row of barrels and blend that. They're not just doing one barrel for something like that.
All the aging is in the barrel. There's nothing in the bottle. Once it's done in the barrel.
Once it goes in the bottle, it's nothing going to happen to it. The only thing you can do is lose it through a little bit of evaporation, but that's all that's going to happen. Now, like I said, I want to compare.
Huge difference in the flavor profile between Evan Williams and Buffalo Trace.
Yes.
This is much smoother.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that Evan Williams will hit you.
Yeah.
But what I want to do is compare these, because as I said, these are the exact same mash bill. So if we taste these side by side, you should taste similarities, but you're going to get a lot of nuanced differences. So Eagle Rare, they actually keep this on the bottle. It says 10 years. So sometimes it's on the bottle, sometimes it's not. It actually changes from year to year based on how many 10-year barrels they have. For Eagle Rare, their goal is to release the same amount of barrels same amount of bottles every year. So they want to make sure that some years they don't have the age statement on it because they want to make sure they're still releasing the right amount of. And if you look at these two, you'll see a color difference.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
So
we've gone from 3 to 5 to 10. Basically.
Yes. So you can see this is the Eagle Rare here, and if I hold them up.
Is that the darker?
Yes.
Okay.
The Eagle Rare is definitely going to be much darker. And again, it's another 3, 4, maybe even 5 years in the barrel compared to that. So you're going to get, but more of those sugars are now going to come out. So when you smell that Eagle Rare, you get more like fruitiness. You get a little more nuance to it. It's a little fresher almost. which is the opposite of what you would think for being aged longer. Absolutely. Now, I think the key thing to look at between these two, and again, when we're talking price, it's not that huge of a difference. 28 to 35 versus 56 to 60. But Buffalo Trace is a bourbon you could go to the store and buy today. Eagle Rare is what's called allocated. So they get limited supply, and if you're lucky, you're able to find a bottle of this.
Is that everywhere in the States? Every state except for Florida.
Yeah.
Really?
Okay.
No. Florida is a little looser in the laws, though, when it comes to that.
The Patels run all the liquor stores in Florida.
What's the laws
So I have to put a total in there.
So
I can
the problem is there are no laws. So this is all done by the distillery.
Yeah.
So the distillery says we're only going to produce X amount of bottles, and where it really comes down to is, and there's actually big news about this today, is the wholesalers and the distributors are calling this allocated. So a story broke today from the biggest wine retailer, Southern Glazer, who distributes wine all over the country. They're being sued by California because they're creating allocations that only benefit larger stores, the Total Wine and More's, the Costco's,
Right.
and it's pushing the little guy out. And the same thing's probably going to happen with this bourbon, because the distributors hold weight over everybody.
Yeah.
So if I want to get a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle for Edwins, I don't get it by just saying I want it. I have to sell X amount of.
Yeah, how do you get it in Ohio, for God's sake?
I mean, you have to jump through all the hoops. So I have to sell like 4 cases of Wheatley vodka a month.
Wow.
Just to get on the allocation list.
The distributor.
Yep. Wheatley vodka is Buffalo Trace's vodka. So they make sure that everything's staying in-house, so they're making their money. But so there's no way in the world at Edwins I could go through 4 cases of Wheatley vodka. I don't go through 4 cases of vodka, period.
Wow.
But you have someone like Winking Lizard, who has 12, 13 locations and can put that vodka in every well drink they want. They get on the list and get every single allocated bottle because they could sell it.
I see.
Oh, they sell the Winking Lizard sells the bottle to someone else.
No, they put it in their well drinks.
Yeah.
Like this
Oh,
standard
the
vodka and like whatever drink they sell.
Rye grows really well in Canada, and in most Canadian whiskeys, Crown Royal, Seagram's, all Canadian Club, they're rye forward. But their rye forward whiskeys tend to be a lot sweeter because they're using large fermentation tanks.
What is rye forward?
So rye tends to have spice like black pepper, like Thai chili peppers a little bit. It's a very distinct spice on the beverage itself. Where wheat tends to be more mellow, more baking spices, more like, I think of it like a Blue Moon, like those flavor.
The rye, it's the same rye as rye bread.
Yes.
Right?
Mhm.
That's the grain.
That's the grain, yep. So we move on to our last one here, and this is where you're going to see a distinct difference. So this is, it is going to be Scotch, so we're going to see a completely different flavor profile to begin with, but you're going to see what 25 years of aging in oak does to it. So this is Ansarach, which is a very small blend of Scotch whiskey from the lowlands. So it tends to be a little more grain forward, not as much of the peat. So if you're like a big smoky peaty Scotch guy, this is not the one for you. But you're gonna see what like age does to it, and even on the nose, like it's got that richness to it, that sweetness from the long aging. The peat's there; it's gonna be there, but the flavor profile on it is just outstanding when you try it.
The first one I've actually had the heat
Mhm.
kind of smell to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
192 bottles in this batch.
That's great.
Wow!
It's
Let's make
very,
791.
very small batch to it, and I think that's what you see when you see this aging. That those nuanced flavors come out. There's little things that you don't expect. Like this, to me, has like herbaceousness to it. There's a little bit like mint or like even like chamomile tea to it, and I think that's where stuff that you don't expect to come comes from in this kind of thing.
That's great.
Our decanters you're going to take home with you. And we're going to fill them up with some Evan Williams.
Yeah.
And we're going to build our own kind of whiskey out of them
Okay, cool.
to take home. So then there's some whiskey stones too for everyone to try.
So what
take
is a
home.
whiskey stone?
So
These are intriguing.
these are meant to be stored in your freezer.
Okay.
And the idea is that they chill without dilution.
Why
So-
are they magnetic? Or are they?
I don't think they.
That's your eyes right now.
That's a whiskey. That's a whiskey.
That's poor laser vision
Scalpel.
correction surgery.
Dr. Duke.
So the idea behind them is,
I can see.
and look, I have a bunch of these in my freezer at home, and I don't use them all the time, but for something like, this scotch here, which you definitely don't want to put this on ice, but you might want to chill it down a little bit and have that nice flavor. These are what these are for. Just give it a light chill. And then for something like that's lower proof. So when you're at the 80, proof, 40% alcohol, if you're adding ice to that, you're really going to lose some of the flavor of it. So using, and maybe it's a combination of these and ice. Because a little bit of water does help. Like, it opens flavors up. And if you're not sure, just pick one of your whiskeys and just put a couple drops of water in it, and you're going to see a little more flavor come out to it. Because the water does help with that. But the whiskey stones are nice for those kind of things, and I like to use them
So
for
you chill them and they take the place of ice cubes.
Yeah.
In the lower end whiskeys.
lower end or high end
Okay.
that you don't want to, that you just want to sip on.
And then how do you clean them?
Yeah, they go right in the dishwasher.
Okay.
The silverware drawer, your dishwasher. Or you're looking at like the baking spices, clove, a little bit of the stevia, which is
Stevia's the
sugar.
yeah.
Because you're gonna get that little caramelization to it.
Natural
Yep,
sugar,
and
the orange.
a little bit of ginger
Ginger.
to get that, and that's especially that little bit of spice.
So that 3 is which one? Then?
That one, if you like a nice, deeply aged bourbon
Okay.
that has like a little bit of those baking spices to it. If you like the fresh one, like for me, my go-to is like this orange, a little bit of this Rosalie, which has a little bit of spice to it as well.
Yeah.
And then, these got mixed up. This here. This is Ozomathus,
Okay.
which is another flower. It has notes of like saffron
Oh, really?
to it.
Oh, wow.
So these are fun. Or you could just put a little bit of everything in there and call it a
How much
day.
do you put in?
I would say you need maybe a tablespoon total of your infusion. So I was talking to someone, I'm like, I wanted to make a Christmas bourbon. So something that has those kind of flavors. So I would do a little bit of like clove. And again, you're not looking for a lot. And this is going to set for about a week, maybe 2 at most. But, 3 or 4 cloves. I like a little bit of the cinnamon for that kind of Christmassy flavor to it. I'm going to put a little of that stevia in there. I use the fancy tweezers for this one.
2 at most before it gets deployed.
Yeah. And you don't want too much flavor to it. You might say, what's too much flavor? But you still want to taste the bourbon in the end here. I might actually add a little bit of barley too. That's a good flavor profile. Ginger, I think that. And then, just give it a little bit. And what I would do is almost, it depends. I will say this, like when we're talking about like collectors and like ones people go after, they typically go over after the higher alcohol. Okay. There's some mystique to that. If you could find anything above 135 proof in the industry, it's called a nuclear bourbon because it's so hot and spicy. And those are things that like sought after by like crazy people like myself who love crazy bourbons, but they're not actually that tasty. They're spicy.
I was going to ask you the Maker's Mark. If they had the Maker's Mark 46,
Mm-hmm.
is that? I didn't know there was a 40. So I didn't know what the 46 meant. So you probably.
Yeah. So the 46 does refer to the 46 proof. But they also there's more to it than that. It was their 46th year
Okay.
in production where they first produced it.
Okay.
So it was like a special anniversary release. Now they continue to produce it. But Makers is doing, everyone's doing interesting things with their whiskeys because they have to stay up with the market. I mean, even Woodford Reserve, which has been pretty standard the whole time, added the double oak, but now they're doing infusions and they're doing cask strengths. I have like a wheat from them, which they've never done before. They have a sherry cask. So everyone's experimenting and trying new things because the market is just growing, but it's also shrinking. So bourbon was the number one beverage out there. Tequila recently took it over. So bourbon's now fighting to get its market share back a little bit. Both are doing well. No one's going to complain, but they still want to get...
That's kind of an age thing, isn't it?
Very much so. I think a lot of the younger generations are moving towards tequila, and the scary part for a lot of these guys is the fact that a lot of the younger generations aren't drinking or drinking a lot less. Yes.
Well.
Yeah.
Really?
Wine's a huge issue. I was at a wine summit last year in Napa, and I mean everyone was talking about how that's the scariest trend going forward is the run. I mean, it's not a walk, it's a run away from wine. And if you're anyone younger than 30, you never ever get a wine.
Is it